Hello and welcome to the Morningstar series, Why Should I Invest With You? I'm Emma Wall and I'm joined today by Paul Daines, Portfolio Manager for Martin Currie. Hi Paul.
Hi Emma.
So we're here today to talk about the perhaps slightly lesser known parts of Asia. Many UK investors, I think, have written off investing in the region because they're scared by China, but there are, of course, other stock markets in Asia, aren't there?
Of course there are, and I think it's interesting to note that whilst China is slowing down, and that is creating some problems for other parts of Asia. So for example, ASEAN markets are definitely quite scared at the moment about what's going to happen to their exchange rates. But the long-term growth story remains pretty unchanged as it has done for the last 10 years. But what you're getting different today is the valuations have fallen really quite dramatically because of what's going on in China and because of course the fear about Fed rate rises. And therefore, I think the opportunities that are starting to appear in some of these markets are better than they've been for at least 3 or 4 years.
And so to that end, I suppose it's a fantastic opportunity for stock pickers, for active fund managers.
Yeah, well, I guess one of the interesting points actually is that the valuations are not all coming down equally. It depends very much on the sector and on individual companies. And where you're getting people really quite afraid and you've had earnings disappointments, that actually creates for us quite an exciting time because the expectation now is much lower from some of these areas than it was, again, 3 or 4 years ago. And to give you examples again, financials, for example, obviously everyone knows that we're going to go through a credit cycle in Asia and particularly in those more developing parts of Asia. And yet the valuations are already reflecting a really bad scenario. And our experience of talking to managements is that whilst there is a credit cycle going on, it's nothing like it was in, for example, 1997 when there was a real collapse in Asia.
Are there any particular country stars then, putting China aside? I know that you are stock pickers, but are there any of like the ASEAN nations, for example?
Yeah, well, the difficulty there is, not surprisingly, markets tend to be very good at discounting these things. So the clear star from an economic point of view is the Philippines. And that's partly because it's continuing to grow very strongly and partly because the foreign exchange risk there is much less, mainly to do with remittance of money from overseas. However, that is also the most expensive stock market in ASEAN right now. Where I think you're getting some interest is somewhere like Indonesia, for example, somewhere like Malaysia, where expectations have come down a very long way. We've talked earlier a little bit about the FX risk, which remain very significant, but both those currencies have already fallen 20 to 30%. And so you start feeling that maybe some of that's already discounted. And in those markets, I think there are some really good opportunities.
I mean, we started the video by saying that China is not the only market in Asia, and so there are other opportunities other than China. But that's not to say there are no opportunities in China either. I mean, it may be slowing down, but they're still looking at a growth rate that we'd pray for in the West.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of interesting things about what's going on in China. The first one is, there's obviously 2 schools of thought with regard to China. One is that there's going to be a hard landing, and one is that the government have enough policy tools to fix the problem. I think we're probably more in the latter camp. I think if there'd been a hard landing, you'd have seen it back in 2009-10, because now you've had an adjustment taking place for a number of years already. So with that background, we don't think there's a collapse coming in China, and so there are opportunities. And actually, one of the interesting markets for me is Hong Kong, because Hong Kong has been hit very hard because it does have a lot of directly Chinese-facing businesses and such like. But the Hong Kong market as a whole also has lots of Asia-facing businesses. So there's lots of businesses which are genuinely Asia-wide that are listed in Hong Kong, but valuations have come down purely because of what's going on in China. So that, for me, is a really interesting place to invest today.
Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Emma Wall from Morningstar. Thank you for watching.